Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is David O'Halloran and I'm delighted to be joined by Jesper Jensen, MVP, Solvo IT Denmark, who will be talking to you today about notes from the field, secure your Azure environments. Remember to join the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is #ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Recently, we launched the ESPC19 program, which is full of Microsoft leaders, a fantastic speaker lineup, and a broad range of topics. Early bird tickets are now available for this conference, which takes place from the 2nd to the 5th of December in Prague, Czech Republic. See for yourself at sharepoint.com. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Simply type in the questions you have for Jesper in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Jesper Jensen. Hello, Jesper.
Hi, David. Thank you for the introduction. So, my name is Jesper Jensen, and as David said, I'm a consultant working in Denmark for Solvo IT, and I'm also an Azure MVP, just been awarded again for the third time. So, I'm very happy to be here and to join you today. And we're going to be talking about how you can secure your Azure environments. This is all based on the learnings I have from working with customers and from my colleagues working with customers on Azure projects. These can be greenfield scenarios, and it can be environments that I've been running for years where we're going in and cleaning up, checking that everything is secure. So there's a lot of different parts that are moving here, and we will be talking about networking in Azure, identities, how you can use policies to enforce your security. And last, we will be talking about how you can report on all of this and what you can do to perform alerting and stuff like that using Azure Monitor. So let's start by talking about how you can secure your Azure networks. The best place to start if you have if you're building a new environment is to use the Azure reference architectures. This is a defined set of resources from Microsoft. This could be that you want to deploy a new network. You need 2 or 3 subnets where you're deploying servers. Microsoft has these references where you can go in, check the best practices and how to get there, and all the considerations you need to do before you deploy anything, and then you can just click deploy from that architecture. It's a really cool solution, and to finish it all off, we also have visual drawings for everything. So absolutely go and check those out. An example of this is a hybrid network architecture here. So on the left we have our on-premises network, and on the right the Azure network. Between these two networks, we need a VPN connection. So obviously we will need a VPN gateway. And then there's 3 different tiers of the subnet. Each of these tiers are secured by using a network security group. And I'll talk more about how you can expand the network security groups. So this solution will deploy all this full network for you, all the subnets, the gateway, and make a secure management subnet where you have a jump box from which you can connect to all your servers you're deploying. That's just one of the architectures that are in there. There's also architectures for stuff that isn't infrastructure, so all PaaS services. There's a lot of help to guidance to get in there. So network security groups is how we secure our subnets. The network security groups can be assigned on a server basis or on the subnet basis. An extension of the network security groups is application security groups. And I find that very few people actually know about these. They are really cool to define your network and get an easy introduction into microsegmentation of your network. Application security groups is just a logical group of servers. So any server you have in your environment can join an application security group, and all the rules that are applied to this application security groups will then apply to that VM. The application security groups are applied on the network interface. So if you have multiple network interfaces, you can have multiple rules for each network interface. And you can have multiple application security groups attached to the same interface. So that makes it possible for you to define different roles for a server. This could be a domain member server. That server will need some ports to talk to the domain controllers. Then you can also add a different role to it, for example, SQL server. And that way, you know, this server will be able to talk on the SQL ports with other servers. An example of how you can create this is using ARM templates. You can also do it using PowerShell and the portal. I'll show you the portal version of it too. Basically, you just need to create the application security groups. There's nothing in there you need to configure or anything, because everything else you do is on the servers where you assign that application security group. So you only need to give it a name and a location for where it should exist. To attach it to a network interface using an ARM template, you will just have to add this section to your template, so application security groups, and then pass on the ID of the application security group. And as you can see, you can assign multiple application security groups to one interface. To use this application security group, you will need to apply some network security group rules to the groups. And this is done by using a property called destination application security groups, where you pass on the application security group ID again. So this rule will allow RDP to all servers that have this application security group attached to them. Let's check it out from the portal. So as you can see in here, I have some virtual machines. Let's just go to the application security groups. It's here. And I have one named ESPC ASG here. There's nothing in here to configure. It's all done. It's just a logical container to connect to our servers. So we go into virtual machines. You can see here I have some different machines. And if we go to networking on that, in here you can see I have an RDP rule already. This is open with a source from anywhere. This means that any server can connect to this, anyone can connect to this server from its public IP address. That's not what we want, so let's go in and retire that rule or reconfigure it. So the source should no longer be any, just an application security group. And we select the application security group here, and then we save it. So now any server that is part of this application security group will be able to connect to this specific VM on port 3389 RDP. And if we want to assign it to another VM, for example, this one, we have application security group in here. You will see it also already assigned here. So this server will be able to connect to VM01 on the specified port. No one else will be able to do it. And if we want to, if I have multiple application security groups, we could just attach them in here instead of using ARM templates and stuff like that. So that's just a quick introduction to application security groups. Let's move on here. Another feature that I find that customers don't know about or don't use is Azure Security Center. Many people have enabled Security Center, just the basic part of it, but they never really took the time to figure out what else they could use in Security Center. And just-in-time VM access is one of the features that is paid for. This is how you create a time-limited access to a specific port on a specific VM. So where many people who deployed VMs in Azure maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, or more than that, by default, a port was open to use RDP to that VM. If it was a Windows VM, if it was a Linux VM, SSH was open. And that was just the default configuration. Not a very good configuration, but that was the default. So many people didn't remove that again because they didn't know about it, which meant that a lot of servers in Azure had RDP and SSH exposed to the internet. So just-in-time VM access is here to help you get rid of that, but still be able to connect to your VMs if you have an emergency of some kind where you need to connect directly to the VM. Just-in-time VM access is RBAC enabled, so only the users that you trust can open these ports. Not everyone should have access to this. Only the people that really needs it in an emergency. So JIT is also very easy to configure. You can do it directly from a VM, or you can go into Security Center in Azure. And as you can see here, I have a very secure demo environment, red lights all over. And down here we have just-in-time VM access. I already have one VM where it's already configured. So Azure will give me recommendations for VMs where I don't have it configured and where Azure thinks that I need to configure this. This is probably this is VMs that have open ports that shouldn't be open for the internet, and that could be RDP and SSH. So let's select this one, and I'll show you how to enable it. So there's no reason to have this and these two. I only want to have RDP possible to open through JIT here. And if I select it, you can configure how many hours this should be able to open for. So when a user needs access to this VM, should he be able to open it for 24 hours or just 1 hour? You can configure that yourself. And you can select if the user should be able to supply a source IP within his request, or if it should be a predefined side block. So for this, I'll just go per request. And then I'll hit save here. And now Azure will enable this in the background. What it's doing in the background is it's actually configuring the network security groups. So if we go into this one we just configured, you'll see I have this RDP rule that we have already configured to only be able from the application security group. And then there's this new rule, which is security center JIT rule. So this will deny all access to port to the RDP port until I enable it in the portal. So if we go to another virtual machine here, this one is already configured. Oh, sorry. Let's go to Security Center. And we can enable from here. So let's say VM03, we want to request access. So we want to enable it, and which source IP should be allowed? Should it only be the IP address that I'm connected to the Azure portal from right now, or should it be another IP range? This could be if I'm enabling it for someone else than me to use, then I could supply a different range, or we could just say from anywhere, which I would not recommend that you do. So I'll just enable from my IP address here and select open port. And this will just take a couple of minutes to go through because it needs to configure the network security group, and then I can connect to the VM after that. So let's see if it's already done it. Yeah, so as you can see here, it already added a new rule, opening up the port, and the source IP is the IP address I'm connected from right now. So if we go to the VM, I'm now able to click connect, and I would like to select the public IP address and and download the RDP file. As you can see here, Azure will also warn me that this VM is configured for just-in-time access. So if you want to connect to it, you need to request access first. We already did that, so it's already open, and we can connect to the VM. Very powerful feature and easy to configure. So that was some ways that you can secure your network in an easy way and a better way to manage the micro-segmentation of servers and only allow the specific ports you need between servers to be allowed. Next up, we're going to talk about Azure policies. Azure policies is part of this whole governance feature set that Azure have, where you can control your governance. Make sure that your configuration is up to date and that nothing is misconfigured and is not configured in a way that your security policy says they cannot be configured. So this is to set up some guardrails for people to work within. It's not to prevent people from getting work done. This is to help them not configure things in an insecure way. Policies can be used for much more than just security features. You can do configuration based on naming of resources. So if you have a naming policy, you can do that. You can select which SKUs people are able to use for different resources, which locations they're going to use. For example, if you want to keep all resources within the European data centers, you can create a policy to allow only those data centers to be used. And then you can do resource-specific configuration. This can be any network security groups with an open port of RDP, for example. You can block that unless it has a very specific use case. You can also audit these things instead of just blocking it. You can do so much in here, and I'll show you some different samples of policies that we use in almost every environment we work on. And recently, Microsoft added a policy initiative. Initiatives are a set of policies all collated into this initiative and can be applied to your subscriptions. So they added a policy set for ISO 27001. It's not everything within that certification that is checked for, but a lot of the technical parts which you can configure is checked for, and I'll show you that one too. So for those that don't know about Azure policies, just a quick introduction here. Policies has different parts that you need to configure. First, we have a mode. The recommended mode for almost all policies is all. If you use the indexed one, this is to configure and enforce tags and location on resources. You shouldn't use indexed in other scenarios. Then we have parameters, so we can pass on parameters to these, which mean we can script everything and use these policies as part of a code deployment. Then you will have a display name and a description for your policy, and then you have the rule. Here you have an evaluation of what is going on. So you have a condition. If this rule is not, if this configuration is not matching what we want, then we have an effect to deny, audit, or append this. So an example of that, if we want to require a tag configuration on servers, so this right here, it says if not, so if this field is not compliant with this policy, this field means tags and with a specific tag name, which matches a parameter value of tag value, then we're going to deny it. So basically we just require a tag here with a specific name and a specific value. Another example is to configure JIT VM access. This is a bit longer, so I'm not going to go through that, but you'll get the slides afterwards. And then you can see some different examples here. So in the portal, we'll go to policy. And then here you can get an overview of how compliant your resources are. So I don't have a lot of resources in here. I have 858 and 99 of those are compliant. That might sound very good, but this is just a demo environment and I don't have that many policies enabled. So if we go into compliance here, we can get a better overview of it and see exactly which policies are compliant and not compliant. So I have one policy here to enable Azure Monitor on VMs, which is not compliant. Azure Monitor is used to monitor different aspects of the VMs in my subscriptions. So I have one resource here that is not compliant. And then you can go in and see which resource is not compliant. And we have this one. So we'll just skip how to fix it, but this means just we need to deploy the log analytics agent on this VM. And Azure hasn't been successful in that, doing it automatically. So I'll need to do some actions here. In here, you can find all the definitions that Microsoft has made available for us. Some of these are in preview and might be changed, so be careful by using those. But a lot of them are not in preview, and you can safely use those and get inspiration from all the other policies here. And as you can see, there's a lot of different things to configure. So if we want something specific for, let's say, virtual machines, we can select compute here, and you can see there's some different policies. So for example, audit all VMs that do not use managed disk. Managed disk was something that was released, I think, 2 years ago. So most people should be using it already. but it's a good thing to get an alert when people are not using managed disks. So that one could be deployed. It's actually one we use a lot at customers to get this overview and make a more secure environment rather than having disks for VM lying around in different storage accounts that no one has control over. You can also see here diagnostic logs for virtual machines should be enabled. This is a way to just at scale enable log collection from all your VMs. So all the diagnostics from those VMs will be collected. There's different configurations here. And you can make your own categories here. So if you develop some policies yourself, you can add a category that is your company name, dash networking, if you have a lot of networking policies that you want to apply. And some examples of these custom policies could be this one, for example. I have some different policies here. This one audits all the managed disks I have in my subscriptions that are not attached to any VM. This is not anything to do with security, but it's more of a cost relationship because disks cost money, and if they're not attached to any VMs, they're not being used. So why are they there? We want an alert for that. One that is more security focused is this one. So in my opinion, no VM in Azure should have a public IP address associated to the network interface. We should be connecting to the VM in other means. So that could be by using a load balancer or an application firewall of some sort. Try not to use public IP addresses directly on the VMs. This policy will tell you if there's a VM with a public IP address associated to the network interface. Another setting here could be to apply diagnostic settings for all network security groups. This policy will actually go and configure this if it's not compliant. So if anyone changes the configuration or deletes this diagnostic log configuration, Azure will run through this policy and it will apply the configuration as I apply it here. So what it does here is it adds a connection to log analytics, which is used by Azure Monitor to collect all the data from my network security group. This is all the events and it's all the counters. So how many times has this a specific rule been hit, and from which IP address, and all that information that we can collect the data from and learn from. Another one, also not very security related, but a good one to have for your virtual machines is to audit if a VM is not having any backup configuration. It's very easy to configure this one too. Just apply it and Azure will go through all your VMs. So if we were going to apply a policy in here, let's take one of the, so this one will check for the public IP addresses on network interfaces. We will click on the policy and then we can click assign. Then you need to select where you want to assign this policy. That's the scope. So you can configure the scope to be a management group in Azure. Management group is just a collection of subscriptions. It could be a specific subscription instead. If you want to just use this policy on only a specific subscription, I want to apply this on all subscriptions in my tenant. And you can also apply it on resource groups. So I'll just select the tenant root group. And I can also exclude some resources. If I have some resources where I know, okay, this will never be compliant because of some some requirement from the business or something like that, I can do exclusions too. And we'll just say the policy definition and assignment name is good. And we won't need to change any configuration here. We'll just audit. So we assign the policy. Oh, I might have assigned it to a scope that I don't have access to with this user, so let's just do it on the subscription instead here. Yeah, so now it's assigned. What Azure will do now is at different intervals during the day, these configurations will be passed through, and if something is not compliant, it's marked as not compliant. If it's compliant, yeah, then it's just in compliant state. So you can see I have these two assignments now, which has not been started. So within an hour or two, my Azure will have run through these and have checked the compliance for all the resources in the scope, and it will set the compliance state accordingly after that. When something is not compliant, it's logged in the Azure activity log. So every time these policies run through, it will add an event in there telling you this is not compliant. That activity log you can collect within Azure Monitor, and from there you can create an alert. So every time something is not compliant, create an alert to send to the specific team that is deploying it or needs the alert or something like that, to warn them that something is not compliant. This could be very important if you're using different security policies in here. And I promised you to just show you the ISO. So we have this collection of policies, which will audit all of these controls that we can configure in Azure, and it will deploy a VM extension to configure the VMs accordingly to this configuration. There's a lot of policies in here, so don't just go out and deploy it and just think everything will be okay. Make sure you test it and specifically test those that are deployed if not exist, because these will make changes to your environment on the VMs or in your subscription. So make sure you test those before you use them. Identity management. This is a different part of Azure where my customers often have issues controlling stuff. So role-based access control is probably the first thing they see. They need to create roles or use the built-in roles to assign them to the correct level. So the networking guys in the different companies, they don't need access to all the compute resources or SQL servers and stuff like that. They need access to the VMs, the network part. Use the roles that are specific for what people need to do. And if you can't find a role that is matching them, you can build your own custom roles. And I'll show you an example of that. Then we have privileged identity management. This is a way to control accesses in an easy way. So instead of, for example, with just-in-time VM access, here you have just-in-time access to just the resources and to make configurations there. And I'll also show you a demo of that. Multi-factor authentication, well, because there's no reason not to use it. You have all the controls in there to deploy it for all your users and exclude service accounts and stuff like that. Go ahead and do it right now if you don't have it deployed already. It's free for all administrators, global administrators in Azure. So go ahead and use it. This is not just to access Azure. This is also for Office 365, and you can use it for access to remote desktop environments or VPN boxes or stuff like that. So it's very powerful, and it's built in a lot of the licenses that we already have. So a custom RBAC role here. This is a virtual machine operator where I've made some changes to. So this description right here, you can see it can monitor and restart virtual machines. You cannot do anything else. So the person have read access to the storage and network configuration and the compute configuration. And then he has the power to start a virtual machine or restart it. So he can't stop it, but he can start it or restart it. That's all. And as you can see in the bottom, you can assign this at different scopes too. So this could be a management group or subscriptions or resource groups. And you can assign it at multiple scopes. Azure AD roles is different from the Azure RBAC roles because Azure AD is another part of Azure. In here, there's predefined roles. You cannot yet configure your own custom roles for Azure AD, but there's a lot of new roles in there, and the past year there's been built so many new roles. So go and take a look at it. Some examples could be a password administrator, someone who can only reset a password for your users. It could be a user account administrator who can do a bit more configuration on the users. A security administrator or reader, so someone who can read the security configuration in Azure AD. This could be how privileged identity management has been configured, or administrate that. And then we have product-specific roles. So this could be Exchange and Skype, SharePoint, Teams, all those different products that are part of Azure AD, using Azure AD as their identity provider. And at the link in the bottom here, you can see all the different roles that has been configured. One word about the Azure AD global admins. This is the description from Microsoft. Users with this role have access to all administrative features in Azure Active Directory, as well as services that use Azure Active Directory. So this is like Exchange Online, SharePoint, Skype, everything. Global admin role in Azure shouldn't be used for anything. You should only use this role in very specific scenarios. As you can see here, the global admins have access to your Azure AD, Office 365, all the data in your Office 365 subscriptions. It could be Dynamics. They have access to SharePoint, all of it. And they can give themselves access to your Azure subscriptions, even if they don't have it. So that button is hidden in Azure AD. If you go to Azure AD and Properties, in the bottom right here, you can see Access Management for Azure Resources. In here, a global admin can give himself access to all your Azure subscriptions and all the resources you have in there, all the data. That's why you shouldn't use those roles unless it's a very specific case and there's a very specific description of what the person needs to do and someone to monitor that he doesn't do anything else than that. So multi-factor authentication, where should we use it? Everywhere, in my opinion. It doesn't help anything that you only use it for Office 365 if you have an RDS environment, for example, or a VPN connection into your network where they can access resources without using multi-factor. At least use it for your admins. It's free for global admins and a few other admin roles. So go and enable it for them. Then I think 1.5 years ago, Microsoft released an NPS extension. So it's an extension for Network Policy Server in Windows Server. This opens up a lot of doors, and it's not the doors in a bad way. This is new features where new places we can use Azure AD MFA. So this could be an RDS environment with RDS gateways. It could be a client VPN, so anything using Radius for authentication. So Cisco, yeah, a lot of firewalls use Radius for authentication. So go ahead and use it if you don't have anything else in place for those environments. So this is the flow for this NPS extension. The user is requesting access to an RDS gateway or a firewall VPN. That request is forwarded to the network policy server, which authenticates to Azure, to your local AD. When that's done and accepted, it will send an MFA challenge through Azure AD MFA, and the user will accept that. When that response is coming back, the RDS gateway will allow the user in. And I have a short video showing all this. So this is a recording I made on my phone. I've already configured the user, so I didn't have to type in any password here. Just approve the multi-factor request. So as you can see, I have an RDS environment. I have an RDS gateway configured. And now I'm going to connect to that specific server. So now it's connecting and authenticating to my local AD, sending the MFA challenge back through Azure AD MFA. It will pop up here in a short. Yeah, there it is. And then I'm accepted into the server. So this is another way of using Azure AD MFA for access to systems that are not Azure based. Privileged identity management. Who needs access to what and when does he need that access? Let's take a look at that. So privileged users might have roles assigned to them that they don't need all the time. So instead of having those permissions assigned to them all the time, where they can make accidents or if their credentials are leaked or something, they can access something. Instead, they are supposed to go and activate these permissions by using privileged identity management. This is a very cool feature and again, very easy to configure, but it's only for Azure resources or Azure AD roles. So you can't use it for on-premises access to servers or stuff like that. So when a user goes and activates a set of permissions, let's say a global admin or a user administrator, you can require that he approves, that someone else approves this activation. I would recommend doing that on global admins, for example, but it might not be needed on a user administrator role because that's just changing a user configuration and that's all. So another option you have is to require MFA when this role is activated. That's up to you again when you want to use that. The user might already be authenticated using MFA and then they won't be prompted to use it again. So as part of these roles, the users have these permissions for a pre-configured period of time. So that could be 3 hours, just like we have the just-in-time access to VMs. And you need to have a team that monitors and audits all the access that people have, all the roles that are assigned, to make sure that they are still eligible for that role. And you can do that by configuring reviews within privileged identity management, which can be automated. So maybe once every third month you want to run a review, send out an email to the owners of a role, say who needs access to this? You have these users today. Do they all need access again now? And people will need to go through that review to maintain that access. So that's a good way of handling that. Let's look in the portal here. So right now I'm connected as a global admin here because I need to configure some different stuff. This could also just be the security administrator role. So if I have an Azure AD role here, I want to assign to someone so they can request access to it when they need it. I can go into the wizard here to see what roles have already been used. And you can see I have the global administrator role. I have some different users there that are eligible. I have the security administrator and I have the privileged role administrator. So let's go and kick someone out of the global admin role. You can see which people it is here, and then you can continue. So my own account is a permanent member of this role, and I can't change this because that's the account I'm connected with right now. So someone else will need to kick me out of that role. This is to ensure that you don't lock yourself out from using your Azure environment. So let's take this one and change the configuration for that. Right now, this user, this is a break the glass account that has access to everything and is monitored in every way to check that no one is logging into it. So right now, I'm going to change the configuration of this account so it's just eligible to activate this role and doesn't have it assigned all the time. And that's all we need to do. So if I go to this role right now, the global admin, you can see in here, it's still there, but might just need a refresh. Yeah, so it's just eligible now. So if I log in with this account, he would need to activate the role before he could use it. To configure these roles and the requirements to activate them, you need to go into settings and find the role. So global administrator here. The maximum activation duration, I've set that to 2 hours. I want notifications when someone is activating this role. I want to require them to put in an incident or request ticket number when they activate it. And Microsoft requires that this role uses multi-factor authentication when it's activated. I cannot configure that. And finally, I can require approval for the role. So if someone wants to activate the role, a request is sent, an email is sent to the selected approvers down here, and they need to approve this activation. So just one of them will need to activate it, approve it. And when they do that, the user will be able to access the role. So from a user perspective, let's see here. I'm logged in as Joey here, and you can see his roles that are assigned right here. So he's a user administrator, and he can activate this role by clicking activate. He just needs to verify his identity first by getting a multi-factor request. And I'm just getting a text with that. In a few. So if we go into this again, this was just because he didn't log in using multi-factor at the beginning. So now he can activate the role instead. And as you can see here, you can set a custom activation time. So if you need an approval for some work you need to do, and it's in the middle of the night, you might not want to disturb those approvers in the middle of the night. You can just set the activation time to be at maybe 9 o'clock tonight. And select the time zone too, and test purpose. So right now this request is not requiring approval, but now this request will go through in 6 hours, and he will be able to do the configuration he needs to do. So as I mentioned, I had a few break the glass accounts. These are highly secured but not personal accounts. These are accounts that you can access if there's an emergency where you cannot access your environment in any other way. Microsoft's recommendation is to have 2 of these accounts that are not configured for multi-factor. Or if they are, it shouldn't be to any personal device. Personally, I prefer to have at least one account, which is not registered to multi-factor at all. Instead, I'm monitoring this account, and I have a lot of scripts in the background to validate that a login is then a legal login. So if someone logs in with the account, they're not prompted for any multi-factor. So when a login is happening, we need someone to monitor that. If it's not a legal login, we might want to react on that. That could be by starting a script that disables the account and kills all the sessions that are currently in use. That way, a hacker won't have access to the account for more than a few minutes. That's enough for them to do a lot of damage. So of course, we need to have other measures in place. We need to validate that the account is accessible, and we need to do that at least every 90 days. Or if someone in the staff is changing, they might have that password. You should store the password for these accounts in a very secure manner, and not just in a password database that everyone has access to. And when you validate the account, then make sure your security department or the people monitoring the account is aware of that, so they don't trigger anything to log out the account. And finally, don't register this account for self-service password reset. You don't want anyone to go and reset the password in some unmonitored way. I think we're just going to skip this. You can monitor the account. Let's just quickly take a look at that through log analytics. So I have a log analytics workspace here, which is collecting all the logs from my Azure AD. So we can just quickly check it. If it's loading. So I have a few queries in here. So this is to monitor any sign-ins from this account. I don't have any logins from the past few months, so let's go back and check to see. So yeah, here you can see in April and May, I had a few logins on this account. This query I can use to create a new alert rule and configure an alert to trigger a script or email or create a new ticket in a system for people to look at it. Make sure that these accounts are secure and that you can quickly lock them down if anything happens to them. So that's just one way of monitoring. You should also monitor password resets on the account. Monitor if anyone is changing the role memberships of global admins role. You should monitor if anyone is changing the configuration on the user account. Anything that has to do with these users, you need to be notified about. Not everything needs to be handled right away, so make sure you create different rules for those alerts. So, as many of you probably know, last year in November, I think, we had some issues with multi-factor in Azure AD. How do we prepare for such a case? This is by using break the glass accounts. This is just one way of doing it. You can handle it in different ways, and it all depends on what requirements your company have to access this. But if you used break the glass accounts that weren't configured for multi-factor, you would have been able to log in, and you could disable conditional access policies, which require people to use multi-factor. So you could disable some of the policies and let people connect from your own secure network within the office or something like that. Or you could let users just dismiss the multi-factor request for a number of days. I don't like that option very much. I'm it all depends on the scenario. So the conditional access policies, disabling those is one way of doing it. It might not be for you. It all depends on your security requirements. And last but not least, we have the conditional access here, which is not the last part. It's reporting, sorry. So reporting all of this. To do reporting, we need some data to report from. This data can come from Azure and Azure AD, and we can push it into log analytics. Azure Monitor can then provide alerts based on all that data. So as I just showed you, if we have a user logging in that is not supposed to log in, we can query log analytics. And if a login is there, we can create an alert from Azure Monitor. That's how we react to an event. If we want to build some reporting on that, we can use Power BI to import data from log analytics. There's also Power BI packs for some of the Azure features and Azure AD sign-in logs. So you can actually use those Power BI packs to just connect directly to Azure AD and pull all these data to just get an overview of where are people logging in from, how many failed logins do someone have, or is there other reasons we need to look at a user. So Power BI can connect to log analytics and different Azure resources. And this was a quote that I heard at a conference a while ago. In a modern deployment, users are your firewall. I don't agree with that totally. So from my point of view, your firewalls are there to protect resources inside your network. Identities are there to protect it, people accessing it from the outside. So you might have firewalls and everything in place, but if people are using their access in a way they shouldn't be able to use it, you need to look at your identities instead, because the firewall won't detect that. So that's all I have for now. Let's see if there's any questions.
Great, thank you, Jesper. Thank you for a great presentation. And we'll just have a look here and just see is there any questions. So I have one here for you, Jesper. Isn't application security groups a lot of work to maintain?
Yes and no. Application security groups is a lot of work if you are building it after you build your Azure environments. So if you build it in from the beginning, when you start deploying new servers or a new environment, it's actually quite easy to use. You just need that extra step of adding servers into a group, which defines the firewall rules for the server. So yes and no, it depends on your environment. If you use it from the beginning, it's very easy to maintain.
Okay, I hope that answers that question. Another one here from Luke. I'll read it in full, Jesper. Thanks very much for a great presentation. It was excellent. And could I ask, how do your best, sorry, just reading this. How do you best get Azure credit to test practice these setups?
So there's different ways you can get some credit or some licenses to test these things. For different licenses, Azure AD Premium and EMS licenses and stuff like that, you can always do a trial. Microsoft also has some options of deploying demo environments where you can test all these things within, but that will only be available in a lockdown environment at Microsoft, so it's not your own tenant. For Azure consumption, you have MSDN where you can get some credits. Otherwise, talk to your account manager at Microsoft. They might be able to pull some strings to get you something to test it. Or your distributors where you buy Azure, they might have some money for that too, or some vouchers to test it.
Great. Hope that answers that, Luke. And we have one here from Dino. What is the maximum number of global admins?
I don't know if there's actually a maximum number or a hard limit on that. The recommendation from Microsoft is to have a maximum of 5 global admins. I would say you should only have 2, and that should be your break the glass accounts. The rest of them should be using privileged identity management to access that role, and they should only do that if it's approved from from someone else. So yeah, keep it at a bare minimum. It's a very powerful role. I think it's even more powerful than the domain admin we're used to have, because this one has access to everything. Can access all the data we have, all the configurations, yeah, and the billing information. Yeah, that's a lot of data for those accounts.
Okay, thank you for that, Jesper. So I think I'm just conscious of time. I think that that's probably it for today. So I'll just wrap it up.
Yeah. Oh, and I can just see on my slides here, those were the slides from last year's conference. So make sure you use the correct hashtag ESPC 19 and not 18.
Good tip. So just finally, on behalf of the ESPC community, I'd like to thank you, Jesper, for today's webinar and taking the time out to do that.
Thank you.
So finally, that ends our webinar. You can check out our future webinars. So the next one we have is Cloud Strategy for Your Organization, How to Start. And further details of our upcoming webinars can be found on our resource center and also any previous episodes of our webinar series. So thank you today for joining us. Take care and goodbye.